Welcome back. It's the Scaling Secrets podcast. Alek Stoffel is here. Now, Alek is a seasoned professional with a diverse background in the automotive industry, technology, and leadership, and he has held over 20 jobs in various fields. So we are going to find out about how to make that all work. We're going to find out about possibly some emerging trends, how to maintain a healthy lifestyle, and advice for aspiring professionals who may not have followed a traditional education path, and so much more. So, Alek,
Great speaking with you.
yeah, happy to have you here. And so we gave a little bit of an intro about you, but in your own words, what are you all about? What makes you tick? What's your focus?
Yep. So I tend to be an operational leader. I like to lead with a infectious positive attitude. I believe just bringing a little bit of happiness, a little bit of optimism into the workplace can really help drive results. Especially with a lot of the projects I've worked on in the past being very complex, requiring a lot of work to go into them. Having that little bit of optimism incorporated into that has helped provide very good results in my history, at least.
I love that because you think, well, you got to get from point A to point B somehow, right? And you have a choice of either being miserable along the way or being happy, and you have to get there some way or another. So why not be optimistic? And what does that entail? Are you the kind of guy that are you about like the meditation, the mindfulness, the binaural beats? Are you just naturally happy and optimistic? How do you get into that positive state?
So I will start by saying I am naturally happy and optimistic, but one of the things I try to do is I go through at least daily, just try to think of what I'm grateful for. I try to look at not so much what I don't have, look at what I do have, and just be grateful. Remember some of the times in my history where I haven't had things like that. A great example is even just a car. When I was a young professional in Wisconsin, growing up, I didn't have a car. I had to ride my bike, rely on buses, rely on friends. So just having a vehicle, just reminding myself like, hey, here's where I was, here's where I am, be grateful for that. And then I try to relay that onto the people I work with and in my teams as well. Like, hey, I know we have a lot to do, we have a lot coming up, but look how far we've come already. And let's be grateful of that and let's keep going.
I love that. And it's an important reminder, and it's necessary, I think, to be reminded of this sort of thing because it's so easy to backslide down into that default mode and wake up and kind of shift towards the negativity and not realize that, hey, you woke up today, you had running water, indoor plumbing, food that you didn't have to go into the jungle and kill. You're not on death's door. You are in a prosperous country, live in the information age. There's so much good that's going on. And I was just reading a few minutes ago on social media, there was some parent that said like he took his family on vacation to the Philippines where there was like no running water or electricity as kind of like a roughing it adventurous experience. And especially when you get back and you have a toilet in your house, you're like, hey, life is actually pretty good compared to how it could be good. And you can apply that in all these different ways of like, being motivated and getting the project management happening. And so kind of along those lines, right, as far as the positivity and optimism, what do you have to humble brag about? What are some of your accomplishments you want to share?
Yep. I think some of my accomplishments are really just at the pace I've started to grow my career. Like I think you mentioned at the beginning, I did not take the traditional path. I took some time off of school when I was younger. I also went out and worked after getting my undergrad. I went out and worked for a bunch of years before going back to school and getting my MBA. But just like even if you look at my most recent career, I was hired on as a product owner, and within a year, I was bumped up to program manager. And I've been doing that ever since. And I think what I relate that back to is my willingness to just dive headfirst in, really learn what I'm trying to manage, not just get a list of tasks and then, hey, say go do these. Really, connect with the people performing the work, understand what they're doing. And then that allows me to not only provide that optimism into that team, but when I'm communicating to my own leaders and communicating to external stakeholders, I can take a very technical jargon and then kind of make it more layman's and make it in a way that they understand. It really helps tell the story, and it allows me and my team a little bit extra leeway if we do need it. So that's something I'm very proud of, yeah.
Well, awesome. And is it safe to say that part of that process you described is like hitting the problem from different perspectives? Because there's like the deep knowledge and there's like the beginner knowledge. And like sometimes I find myself like wanting to write like a blog post or a book or something. And I find myself saying, well, I'll write some on the computer. I'll write some by hand. I'll write some on the phone. I'll go for a walk. Sometimes I feel like I need to like hit the problem from different depths and different kind of angles. Do you have a similar train of thought?
Yeah, 100%. And I like to say, just being able to articulate the problem clearly is half the battle, right? You have a problem, being able to articulate it means you understand it. And if you can articulate it to different people in different ways, that means you really understand it. And if you don't understand the problem, you have no chance of solving it.
Right, that's huge, and that's so simple but also profound. I think in programming they call that the rubber duck problem, right? You have a problem, and then you have a rubber duck you're explaining it to, and I think many of us have been there where we're just like stuck in a problem. We're going through the day to day, putting out fires, but then hey, if we go and talk to our friend or our spouse or our coworker or whoever, and just articulating that into words, like sometimes the problem presents itself, or at the very least, a different approach, a different way of going about it. And so, you mentioned about how you do this kind of these multiple stages in life, right? You've had the 20 plus jobs, you did the time out from school and got back. And if someone is hearing that, they might be a little bit afraid of the losing momentum, right? Like, you make me think like, well, if I'd stopped school and then done something else, I might have not restarted. And so is that deliberate? Is the momentum or the restarting come naturally, or was there a little bit of a trajectory course correction there?
Yep. So I'll say I got my first job when I was 12 years old. So that's also part of the reason why I've had over 20. I've been working. I've had consistent employment since I was 16 years old. So it's been a few years now. But I won't understate like when I did. So I finished freshman year of college and then dropped out before sophomore year. A little over 2 years off before returning. It was difficult to get back into the swing of things and get back the momentum, but having those 2 years off, one, I was much more mature, much more ready to go to college and to get my head down and finish it. But also, I had much more motivation. I lived in the real world. I had bills. I realized, like, hey, it's fun to be out of the house. It's fun to do all this, but like, income's important, right? If you want to have a good life, if you want to go on vacation, you want to have experiences, things like that, you need that income to help drive that. And knowing that's what I wanted and knowing what I didn't want is what I was living at the time, that was a great motivator for me to go back to school. So yeah, the momentum, losing that, it will become a challenge for sure. But look for that motivation, look for that reason why. I'm a big believer in starting with the why. And so as long as you have a good reason, you have a good motivator, you can regain that momentum.
I love that. Once you kind of try these different things out and go through the struggle, the adversity, figure out what's important to you. And you hear about this sometimes where like people might be on a weird career path that is not for them. And maybe it's because it's ran in the family or they had a friend and they heard that such and such career was okay and they kind of aren't fully dedicated to it. And then they don't really take it seriously and they don't really realize it, and then they get down a path and they wonder why they're so unhappy, unfulfilled. And so it seems like it's important to have this sort of self-awareness to figure this sort of thing out. And so you've been through these different kind of life stages, and then now I understand that you have two young boys and you're balancing career, personal growth, family life. So what's the secret there?
Secret is to push through the struggle and be grateful. Because yeah, two young boys, a recently turned 2 year old, and another one, the older one will be 5 coming up in June. And me and my wife both work as well. I'm not going to sit here and lie and say there's some secret magic sauce and it makes it easy. It is a struggle, but it's kind of looking for the silver lining and looking for that beauty in the struggle, right? It is okay to struggle for a little bit and work through it. But then again, I'm going to go back to that, what I was talking about earlier about being grateful. There are moments where I'm dead tired at the end of the day and the boys are asking me to play hide and seek or chase them around or something. And my initial reaction is to not want to because you had a long day, long week, whatever. But then I have to just kind of remind myself, like, hey, I have to be grateful for these moments because they're fleeting. We're not going to get this time back at this age again. Once they grow up, they're grown at that point. So I think for me, the trick is to just reminding myself, leaning on my wife when I can. She leans on me when she can. We don't expect each other to be perfect every day by any stretch of the imagination. But yeah, so I'd say answer your question in short terms, being grateful, reminding yourself of that, and having that support system when necessary.
I love that. I can relate to a lot of what you're talking about. I have an almost 4-year-old. The wife and I work from home, and it's similar situation where having the kid has forced us to communicate more. We rely on each other, and I'm also finding myself tapping into that gratitude every day because like I drive him to school, and sometimes I am tired. Sometimes I'm like I do have things I need to do, but then I have similar thoughts of like this time will not come around again. And you always hear these statistics. There's the amount of time between age 0 and 18, the amount of time that you spend with them. And then then there's the time after age 18. And I think you spend like 1 year's worth of time with your kid after they turn 18. And the way that sometimes I go like weeks without even talking to my mom, I can definitely believe that. And then there was something I read the other day that was like, there's a time where you'll pick your kid up and then put your kid back down and never pick your kid up again. And it's like, it tugs on the heartstrings, right? It hurts. And so it's so important for us to make the most out of what we're doing. And so it's kind of switching gears back into the whole like job, work, career thing. You're big on effective communication, leadership roles, managing projects and teams. And so what are some secrets you have there? Because like we want to do our best at home and do our best at work. So what are some of your secrets into taking the gratitude, optimism, and all that into the workplace?
The thing I want to touch on there is the communication piece. I think that's really important. I think it's a piece that gets missed a lot. One of the things am a believer of is the biggest issue with communication is the illusion that it has occurred. And basically what I mean by that is there are meetings I'll be in, and a lot of people will be talking and using buzzwords and whatever, but then nothing's actually being communicated. And I've seen in the past where people are afraid to ask questions because they are afraid to look uninformed. And I've always thought I would much rather look uninformed asking a question that I should know than actually be uninformed. And so it's just a reminder of that, of being not afraid to ask the questions, even if it might be a slightly embarrassing one, but ask it so that way, because the outcome's worth the slight embarrassment. And then also, as a leader in my area, when I'm being okay asking those questions in group settings, it fosters a culture of allowing others to do the same. And so that way I'll have even like some engineers that they'll ask questions of things they probably should have known. Maybe we've talked about it a few times, but they can't remember or whatever. I would much rather have them ask the question so that we can get to the answer, we can talk about it again, and make sure we can drive that result, than them, be quiet, they don't want to embarrass themselves and not ask anything. So I think that communication piece is really, really important. And it's not just communicating for myself, but making sure there's a culture of communication on the teams I'm a part of.
Awesome. And so it's like my brain is creating diagrams of what you're saying here. Like there's kind of the either or, right? There's the decision between being uninformed or looking uninformed. So that's like an important reminder if we're stuck and need to speak up. Then there's sort of the ripple effect you mentioned, where if you make it okay in this team group environment to be fine, it's not even really looking stupid. That's like the phrase that you think, but it's just getting the clarification, making sure that we're on the same page. When it's okay for you to ask that, then it's okay for others. And then there's kind of the flip side thinking of, well, if it's easy to think, well, I'm afraid of asking this question, but if you yourself were on the other side of that conversation explaining something, wouldn't you want someone to ask a question just to make sure that things are everyone's on the same page and everyone understands? And it seems like a lot of these lessons are like adulting lessons. Like there's a difference between being maybe like a teenager or a young adult and immature and making all these mistakes, not realizing these mistakes, versus being an adult and saying, hey, there's a lot when I was a young punk, I thought I knew everything, and then I realized like there's so much that I don't know, and there's value in some of these simple actions. Someone says something to you, don't be afraid of asking a simple question. You don't have to one up the person, or even like restating it in your own words to make sure that everyone understands. And then there's like this whole thing of like the abandoning the idea of a perfect conversation. And so I'm not sure if you've kind of dealt with this, but I used to have a conversation with someone and it could have gone great. And afterwards I find myself like, I think ruminating is the term, right? Like thinking back about, well, I could have made that joke or I could have said that. And after a while, I was just like, there's no such thing as a perfect conversation. And even if you think you could have, would have, should have said that really clever thing, would it have really come out that way? Or would the other person have thought that that was clever? So do you have any kind of similar struggles with the perfectionism or trying to not go for perfectionism and just getting the job done?
Yeah. So I don't struggle as much with the perfectionism piece. I'm much more of a let's make sure we get the job done. Let's work through it. I don't focus too much on making sure every little polish is or the polish is exactly there, right? We want to prepare and we want to try and be prepared as much as we can, but understanding it's okay. Things are gonna happen, right? Some things are gonna be clunky, and that's fine. But I think what it really goes back to is going through those conversations, like you said, going through those, looking back, I'm like, hey, I should have said this or I could have said that. It's about taking something away from every conversation. Even if we find the conversation we had wasn't valuable for the project we're working on or the task we're trying to complete, there's something to take away. Okay, why wasn't it perfect? Or like, wasn't it valuable? Then remembering that for the next conversation and trying to implement those lessons learned. I try to focus more on like that, not so much like to make it perfect, but like what could be better to help drive better outcomes, and then just keeping a reminder of that, and just trying to improve little bits at a time.
I like that. Like there's different outcomes from different conversations, and it doesn't always have to be information. It doesn't always have to be learning. Sometimes you can just be checking in and make sure a project is working out or that someone is on track or that I'm making it to my appointments and things like that. Like we can have different outcomes from these different meetings. And so you've been in all these job roles and all these kinds of projects, and sometimes things go wrong. So was there a moment or a project you feel like sharing where it was stressful, almost failure, had to overcome? What comes to mind as far as like some sort of past stress?
I can think of a project. This one's really stuck with me. I go back to it a lot for lessons learned. When I was in my first role outside of undergrad, and essentially what had happened was we had committed something. I had committed some things to my superior, and then we had committed some things to one of our clients. One of the things that happened was it was a report I was providing to my superior. I had sent the report, and then I was in a rush to get out of the office, so I disconnected my laptop from the docking station and kind of had it out, not realizing that the actual report hadn't sent out of Outlook. And when I disconnected, it paused it. So that became a sticking point with my superior and I. But that report ultimately was adding into something else, which was going to the client, which then we fell short on that promise as well. And I think the big mistake I made was the next morning I came in. I did come in early the next morning, realized my mistake, and when I went to kind of apologize or make amends for it, I reached out to my superior and the client. And I think the mistake I made was I was way too hasty and trying to act too quickly to regain some of my trust about the mistake I made. And I didn't really take a step back, look at the whole picture, and maybe align with my superior before communicating anything. And what it taught me was slow down a little bit, take the time to really think through the actions you're committing, and make sure that any consequences, whether positive or negative, are known before you go ahead and commit that action.
I like that a lot. They say don't sweat the small stuff, or like Winston Churchill would always take naps during World War II. He was getting bombed the heck out of, but then he still said, well, I have this problem, and if I go and take a couple of hours or a day or two to think this over, will the whole world end? Well, no, and maybe I'll even come to a better solution or conclusion that I otherwise would not have if I was just like in fight or flight mode all the time. So that's a helpful lesson that if it allows, then take time and think through your solutions and be a deliberate, slow thinker when it serves you. And so, since this is the Scaling Secrets podcast here, Alek, I know that scaling means different things to different people, and you've been involved in all these different businesses. So, as far as the secrets to scaling a business, what comes to mind as far as your uniqueness and your insights, what you've learned? What do you have to say about scaling secrets?
I think what I would have to say to that is one of the big things in scaling is making sure a process is repeatable and manageable, especially long term. And one of the things I think I bring to the table is understanding, like when we were first designing a process, what I've seen in the past is a lot of people try to focus on making the process perfect from the jump before actually implementing or trying anything. And I try to be more action oriented with that and say, let's get a process design, let's think through it. But at some point, we just got to like start the process and actually working through it so we can actually learn about how it's working. There are things that we don't know, right? Everything you try to plan for, you won't be able to plan for everything. So at some point, you got to make sure you implement the process with the knowledge that, hey, this process is going to start. We're going to revisit it. We're going to try to fine tune it over time. It's not going to be perfect at the beginning, but we will get there eventually. And for scaling a business or scaling anything, you got to make sure those processes are good. So not only do you have to be okay with starting a process and but you have to make sure to go back and revisit it. Don't feel like just because you committed to a process that you have to be committed to that long term. I see a lot of times where people's egos get in the way, where they say, "Hey, I developed this process, so I'm going to defend it no matter what, even if it has deficiencies." Anything I develop, I want people to find deficiencies. I want people to poke holes in it. I think I've called like the swords technique before, like throw your swords, throw your spears technique, throw your spears at this process or this idea so we can make it better. And I think that's really, really important when it comes to scaling.
I think that's very helpful because like you said, if we strive for perfection right out of the gate, then it will take so long, and then we'll be resistant to change. Whereas if you figure out your proof of concept, your first version, you take action, you make it happen, you throw the spears and figure out what your weaknesses are and what to change, and you iterate, and you think about how many hundreds of versions of Windows have been out, or like your smartphone or all the apps on there that always update. Like things are always changing, and we need to maybe embrace that change. Like just last night I was watching some video about like Russia going to Mars, right? In like 1971. I'm like, I didn't realize they went to Mars that early. And it's like they sent a probe to like survey the planet and another one to land, and the one survey didn't work. So they were just like, okay, we'll go there anyway. And it landed, and it lasted like 17 seconds, and they didn't account for the dust. But it's like, they were like, well, here's our plan, and then we'll build. Well, will we give up completely? Well, no, we spent billions of dollars getting the spacecraft to Mars. We'll just kind of say, well, here's our like 4 possible solutions. I guess we'll go with the least bad one and just kind of continue on. And it's just interesting to think about, just kind of figuring out your SOP or whatever your process is, and then updating it over time, and just kind of having that habit. Like we were mentioning momentum a few times here, just the habit of kind of always being in motion and figuring some of these things out. And so, don't pretend to know you inside and out with all of your different adventures, but is there a hidden question that I'm not asking you? Or is there something that you just really wish that I was asking you about?
I mean, I think you've asked some great questions, and it's led to a really good conversation. I appreciate that. I think one of the biggest things I like to share is really about being personable with everybody, right? And what I mean by that is, and I believe the saying is like, treat everyone with respect, from the janitor to the CEO. There have been times, and actually here's a perfect example. I'll go way back to while I was in college. I was working as a lifeguard at Noah's Ark, which is the water park here, and I was just trying to strive and be a good employee. I was on the top of a water slide, and I would have to hold the tube full of people waiting for the lifeguard at the bottom to give me the signal to send them down, right? And I would have like random facts prepared or random questions prepared, and I would like talk to the group of people in the tube while they were waiting. I remember this specific example. I was asking like, do you know who Brett Favre's first pass completion was to? And it's a bit of a trick question because the answer is himself. He actually threw the pass, got deflected, he caught it. That's history. I didn't realize there was actually a VP of Noah's Ark in one of the interviews when I was doing this, and she was just loved to see how I was like talking with people and making sure they were having a good time before sending them down. And I wasn't doing anything special because of her. I didn't know who she was at the time, but it kind of goes to the point, like, you don't know who everyone is, what their life story is, what they're doing based on appearances or job titles or anything like that. So I like to make sure to treat everyone with respect, spend time, talk with everyone, get to know people, and you'd be surprised how many positive consequences have come from that down the road.
I think that's great, and that's undervalued, right? In the people skills and the communicating and the small talk and brightening someone's day, and not just doing the bare minimum and not just going through the motions, but kind of just doing more and being memorable and being interested in what they have to say and everything that goes along with that. And so we've had, like you said, we've had a cool conversation just jumping around different sorts of subjects and topics. And so as far as you, Mr. Alek Stoffel, and what you want awareness on, what is the next step? What's the call to action after someone hearing about you and your story? What should someone do? What should they check out after this podcast episode?
Yeah, so I'm a big proponent of education. And I know right now, especially, education has been somewhat under attack culturally here in the United States. And for rightful reasons. It has gotten very expensive. It can lead to not the greatest outcomes, especially if you're using student loans, which even myself, I have student loans that I'm paying off still. But I really think the next step for people to do is look at where they can educate themselves, where they can upskill themselves, what type of knowledge they can obtain, whether it be a degree, an advanced degree, even certifications, just online learnings. I think to me that's the biggest thing anyone can do. My undergrad's in economics, and my final senior thesis paper was focused on median income for each state and what helps drive that. And what we found was the number one driver of median income in the state is actually the percentage of that go on to some form of post-secondary education, whether that be an apprenticeship, certification, tech school, four-year college, whatever. As long as you're educating yourself in something, you're going to increase your lifelong earnings. But you have to be intentional with it. Don't just go and say, I need to get a degree and just figure out what's easiest. Figure out, what do I want to do? What makes me happy? What will I get the sense of accomplishment out of? And then look to see, okay, now those are the jobs that align with that. What type of degrees or certifications or training or education do I need to get into that role? So that's what I'd say the first thing is intentful. Look for the education, look for that career path that you want to step into.
That's great, and it's helpful, and maybe not immediately super intuitive, right? Because, like you said, you want to go for what's fun. Your brain wants to go for the immediate pleasure, the path of least resistance. But the more logical, long-term, fulfilling path is to say, hey, here's my goal. I want to have this for my career, but then in between the present and the future is some form of difficulty, right? You have to get this degree, go to class, get your student loan, pass a test, and there's that delayed gratification to figure it out. But on the other end of that is some fulfillment.
Let me add one thing too there. So I got my MBA at Georgia Tech. It was an executive MBA program. And there were individuals in there that were senior leaders at companies, in their 40s, 50s, and 60s even. There were individuals in there that, were C-level executives. But, they had an undergrad degree, they had great careers, but they wanted that next level. They wanted that next step. And just going and doing the program led to expanding their networks. It helped, expanding their knowledge base beyond just their own work experiences. So I also want to add, it's never, don't feel like if you're of a certain age either, you can't go and chase down that education or that training. Even if you don't necessarily need the education itself, being in that program can be a great tool to expand your network and expand your horizon.
I love it. Overcoming limiting beliefs. And also, like we were saying, there's more to the education than just the information, right? There's the connections and the relationships and all those other things. And I mean, learning is tricky, right? Because sometimes there's gaps in your knowledge, or sometimes you've become so focused on the advanced and the cutting edge that you've maybe forgotten, or the fundamentals have sometimes faded, and it can help to just beef up that knowledge. And so, as far as someone taking the next step with you, do you have contact information, or is there some place you want to send us afterwards?
You can always find me on LinkedIn. I'm not a big social media person, so I actually have any social media profiles. Uh, I technically have a Facebook, but that's for Facebook Marketplace and Messenger, specifically for fantasy football, believe it or not. But yeah, definitely look me up on LinkedIn, reach out. I'm always happy to have a conversation.
Well, fantastic. So if Alex insights and messages here today resonate with you and you want to continue that conversation, that is Alek Stoffel on LinkedIn. First name Alek, last name Stoffel. Alek Stoffel. And as we wrap up, wind down our conversation here, Alek, I always like to stump my guest for just a slight moment and ask them for a quote or lessons. That way we get a sound bite. That way we're excited at the end. So does anything come to mind as far as a fun final quote or lesson?
Yes, my favorite quote. Well, there's two of them. So there's the one. It's funny to say, it's from Ted Lasso. The "Be curious." I love that quote. I have it written all over the place. I try to remind myself of that every day. But the big quote that I really try to live by is, a lot of times people say successful people are lucky, right? And I agree. I think successful people are extremely lucky. I think you need luck to be successful. But for me, the definition of luck is where preparation meets opportunity. And so you have to prepare, you have to be ready for that opportunity when it arises.
Very nice, very inspiring. As we think about both those things, about being curious and about luck, then go and find Alek Stoffel on LinkedIn. You'll be glad you did. You'll have a fun conversation. And if he gets to more deliberate LinkedIn posting, then you'll see some of his insights. So Alek Stoffel on LinkedIn. Wonderful speaking with you today, Alek.
You too, Robert. Thank you very much for having me.